The file begins. Miami, 2026. The rain on the Biscayne Bay has a metallic taste, like old blood. She watches it from a rented condominium, a glass box of curated anonymity, miles away from the Spanish-style mansion the tourists still photograph. The silence in these rooms is absolute, broken only by the hum of an air conditioner working to fight a humidity it cannot defeat. It is a different silence from the one she once craved. This is the silence of exile. Pause. The world tour, once billed as her triumphant return, became a ghost. Its digital posters haunt the internet's graveyards, monuments to a life that was. The public verdict was not delivered by a judge in a black robe, but by the relentless scroll of a billion thumbs. An inventory of sins compiled by strangers. The anatomy of a fall is rarely about the crime itself. It is about the loss of adoration, which for an icon is a death more profound than any legal sentence. The first tremor came not as a roar, but as a quiet vibration through the digital ether. The Pandora Papers. A name that sounded like mythology, but delivered a very real poison. Initially, her team treated it as a brush fire, containable with a well-worded statement. A misunderstanding of complex, but legal, financial architecture. This was her first and perhaps most fatal error. She misjudged the temperature of the room. The world was cold and hungry for a reckoning. Her statement, crafted with the logic of a businesswoman, was read as the confession of a queen who believed she was above the rabble. They didn't see a global artist. They saw a name next to a number in an offshore account. Pause. And that number felt like a personal betrayal to every person who had ever bought a record. The meat grinder of fame had found its fresh meat. Her truth, once her shield, was now the sharpest weapon turned against her. But every weapon is forged, and this one was hammered into shape long before the world knew her name. It was forged in the humid furnace of Barranquilla, a city built on trade and secrets. She was a strange child, a fusion of Lebanese melancholy and Caribbean fire. Her first audience wasn't a stadium. It was her family, watching this small girl with the old voice and hips that moved with an unnerving, ancient rhythm. Her talent was a genetic anomaly, an uncomfortable truth in the polite Catholic schools she attended. The first chapter of her life wasn't a fairy tale. It was an inventory of losses. Her older brother, lost in a motorcycle accident. Her father's business, collapsing into bankruptcy. She saw wealth turn to dust before she ever learned to count it. Pause. That became the engine, not fame, survival. The desperate, clawing need to build a wall of money so high that no tragedy could ever climb it. Her first record deal was a failure. Her second, a footnote. The industry tried to sand her down, to make her palatable. They failed. It was only when she seized control, writing her own anthems of heartbreak and resilience, that the foundation was laid. Pies descalzos, bare feet. It sounded like poetry. It was a declaration of war. A war fought on one front is easily won. A global campaign requires a different strategy. The conquest of the English-speaking world was not an artistic whim. It was a corporate takeover. The album title itself, Laundry Service, was a cold, brilliant piece of marketing. A promise to wash away the foreignness, to present a clean, digestible product. And it worked. The world didn't just listen, it consumed. Every World Cup anthem, every Super Bowl halftime show was another territory claimed. Another flag planted on the peak of the global consciousness. But the music was only the beginning of the empire. It was the gateway drug. The real money, the kind of wealth that gets you noticed by tax authorities, was built in the silence between albums, perfumes, real estate, endorsement deals. Pause. A philanthropic foundation that was both a genuine passion and a masterful stroke of public relations. She wasn't just Shakira the artist, she was Shakira Incorporated, a multinational corporation with a single smiling face on the letterhead. The architecture of this empire was intricate, global, and designed for efficiency, the same efficiency that would later look like evasion. She built a castle to keep the world out, only to find she had created the perfect prison. The walls of this prison were not made of stone. They were made of paper, an intricate lattice of holding companies and trusts, designed by the quiet architects of wealth preservation, men in Geneva and Panama who spoke in hushed tones about tax optimization. They sold legality. They delivered opacity. The first fatal signature was not on a record deal, but on the incorporation documents for a shell company in the British Virgin Islands. A digital ghost created for one purpose: to hold the rights to her own voice. The decision to declare residency in the Bahamas followed. Pause. A sun-drenched paradise that asks few questions. This wasn't an oversight. It was a strategy. A perfectly rational decision for a multinational corporation, which she had become. The machine was flawless. A perfectly legal, perfectly opaque system for managing global wealth. But the world has a nasty habit of turning on the lights, and what was once opaque becomes damningly clear. And then, the lights came on, not with the flick of a switch, but with the force of a data breach. The Pandora Papers, a digital tomb cracked open for the world to see. And inside, among presidents and oligarchs, was a name that sang of love and heartbreak. The documents laid out the anatomy of the fall. The network of offshore entities was no longer a secret whispered between lawyers. It was a public map, a roadmap of evasion, according to the Spanish prosecutors. The core of the indictment was not the companies themselves. It was geography. It was time. Pause 183 days. That was the line. The difference between a global nomad and a Spanish tax resident. Her defense was a hymn of compliance sung by a choir of expensive lawyers. The structures were known. They were declared. But the prosecution wasn't just in a courtroom. It was in every headline. The Pandora Papers were more than a leak. They were a verdict. A permanent, searchable digital record of every decision made in the shadows. The ghosts in the Caribbean server rooms now had a face, and it was hers. The prosecution's case was not built on high finance. It was built on the mundane, the ordinary debris of a life lived. They presented evidence not of a global superstar, but of a Barcelona resident. The receipts from her favorite hairdresser on the Carrera de Tussauds, the membership at a high-end gym. Pause. The veterinary bills for her dogs. Each purchase, a small, quiet betrayal of the nomad narrative. The defense painted a portrait of a citizen of the world, her life a blur of private jets and hotel suites. They produced flight logs and Instagram posts from a dozen countries. But the Spanish hacienda presented something far more compelling. A picture of routine, of roots. The prosecution argued that for more than half the year, her center of life wasn't the Bahamas. It was a mansion in Esplugue de Llobregat. The battle was no longer over millions of euros. It was a battle over time itself, over 183 days, a number that had become a guillotine. The emotional toll was etched onto her face in every courthouse appearance. The spectacle was the true punishment. A global icon of empowerment, now a defendant under the flat, unforgiving light of a Spanish courtroom. A trial that was a slow, public dissection. The prosecution's secret weapon was not a document. It was memory. The sworn testimony of former staff. The people who saw the life behind the gates. Their statements dismantled the carefully constructed fiction of a transient existence. They spoke of school runs, of parent-teacher meetings, of a life not lived out of a suitcase, but rooted in the fabric of a city. This was the anatomy of the fall. While the public saw a web of offshore companies, the court was shown a web of daily habits. The financial architecture itself was a masterpiece of obfuscation, a labyrinth designed by the best minds money could buy. Her image rights, her very name, lived in a company in the British Virgin Islands. That company was licensed by another in Luxembourg, managed by a trust in Malta. It was a digital coffin designed to bury income far from the taxman's reach. But every complex system has a point of failure, a single, fatal error. For them, it was an email, an innocuous message to her managers discussing long-term school options in Barcelona for her children. Pause. Sent in a year she claimed to live nowhere near Spain. The architects of her financial empire had built her a gilded cage, but they left the key in the lock for the world to find. The trust was not just broken, it was weaponized. That weaponization was brutally efficient. The verdict didn't just demand repayment, it triggered an avalanche. The carefully constructed dam of corporate entities burst, and the floodwaters of liability swept everything away. First, the sponsors. Pepsi, Activia, the brands that had plastered her face across the globe, now treated her name like radioactive material. Their termination clauses were executed with surgical precision. The Las Mujeres Ya No Lloran tour, once a victory lap, became a public shaming. A meat grinder of glory. Every sold-out stadium was just another payment on an unpayable debt. Pause. 90% of the gate receipts were garnished before they ever reached her. The public saw a superstar on stage. The bankers saw a depreciating asset liquidating itself in real time. Her personal life, once a fortress, became a ruin. Friends, advisors, lovers. They vanished like ghosts at sunrise, leaving only the echo of their legal bills. By 2026, the empire was not just broken. It was gone. The mansions were sold to cover fines. The royalties were mortgaged for decades to come. All that remained was the shell of a global icon, living in a rented apartment, haunted by the ghosts of what she once owned. The post-mortem audit was conducted not in a courtroom, but on a single sheet of paper. Her last will and testament. It was a document of profound and bitter simplicity. There were no assets to bequeath, no trusts for her children, no gilded farewells. Instead, there was a single devastating clause. She bequeathed the master rights to her entire musical catalog, the very soul of her life's work, to the Spanish treasury. It was not an act of charity, it was the ultimate act of defiance. A final, bitter invoice sent to her executioners. In the end, was she a villain or a victim? The answer is irrelevant. She was a product of a system that rewards complexity and punishes exposure. Her legacy is a paradox. The music, a permanent fixture in the global consciousness, a soundtrack to joy, heartbreak, and rebellion. But her life became a cautionary tale whispered in the back rooms of accounting firms. A story about how the machinery of wealth, once it turns against you, grinds everything to dust. even the hips that never lied. Pause. The music plays on. The artist is gone,